Thank you all so much for joining today. My name is Christine Woody, and I am one of the policy coordinators with Empower Missouri. Empower Missouri is a statewide nonprofit organization that focuses on advocacy and community education on a wide range of social welfare issues. A lot of our work is focused on food security, housing, and criminal justice related issues. For decades and decades and decades and decades, Empower Missouri has had local kind of chapters, local council areas. And in those local areas, every month we would hold an educational forum on a different topic that related to social justice and social welfare. And since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to shift a little bit and not do these in-person lunch meetings like we used to do. And when we did that, we decided it would probably be easier for everybody if we just did one forum a month for all of our members, not just St. Louis or not just Kansas City. Instead of doing multiple online events, we would just do one forum a month for our Kansas City and our St. Louis folks. And we started that in at the end of spring last year and continued into the fall. Over our fall forum, we did it following the St. Louis normal schedule, which was the third Fridays. But here in the spring, we're going to follow what used to be Kansas City schedule, which is the first Friday forums. So from now, February through May, we'll be meeting on the first Friday of the month at noon. The overarching theme that we kind of went through for this spring is we're going to be talking about how all politics are local, right? Everything that happens, either if it's on the city, the state, or even in the federal level, it affects each one of us and each one of our communities directly. And we're going to follow that theme all the way through till May. So this month, we really are focusing on local, and we will be really focusing on the local initiatives, local advocacy, and local work. And we will be doing that in a big group and then breaking up into more of a breakout session focused on St. Louis and Kansas City to wrap up the session today. So there's just a few webinar and Zoom basics for you to look at before we get started with our panel. Just remember to have yourself muted if possible when we're speaking, just because it makes it a little bit easier in terms of background noise and things like that. And it tells you how to do that on the screen by just hitting the microphone button. If you're on a phone and calling in, you can hit the *6 button to mute and unmute yourself. It really does help if everyone is muted, so that would be great. There is a chat feature if you are following us online that you can type questions into. And our moderator will kind of follow those chat questions and ask them of the panel as we go through. And we are going to record this. So afterwards, I'll follow up with an email to everyone with the link to that recording. And you can find it also on our website to share with others who couldn't make it here today. And this is just a kind of an overview of what we're hoping that you will learn from this event that we're holding today. I'm not going to read all of that, but you can see that. One thing that we are able to do with these educational forums is that we're able to offer continuing education credits for social workers through the state Social Worker Association. We can offer 1.5 hours of credit for that. So if you are a social worker and you need those continuing education credits, to access those, you'll need to fill out the evaluation form, which I will put that link into the chat. I'd really love for all of you to fill out the evaluation form. But if you are a social worker and need continuing ed, we do need you to do that. And to get the certificate, I'll need you to email me some things so I can put it on our record. And that's just your name, your mailing address, and your last 4 digits of your social security number. So my email address is in there. I will also put that information in the chat so you can reach out to me and I will send you the certificate after this is over. And then just some things that I'm going to mention now, because the way that this forum is going to end is after we do our full group panel, we're going to break up into some breakout rooms of St. Louis and Kansas City, and we're going to end the forum just in those breakout rooms. So before we continue for today, I wanted to just look ahead. So our next event that we have is an Empowering You webinar that's going to do a deeper dive into President Biden's stimulus plan. He has a lot of great things in there regarding housing as well as nutrition assistance. So it's going to look at deep dive what that actually entails and what the plan is moving forward to help. And that's on February 18th. And then likewise, Empower Missouri holds coalition meetings on quite a few of the issue areas that we work on. These are our 4 coalitions that we staff and work towards. These are the dates of those meetings, and all of the information about how to join those coalitions are on our website at empowermissouri.org. So if one of these issues is really something that you are passionate about or concerned about, we'd love for you to get involved in our coalition work on that specific issue area.
Thanks, Christine. My name is Mallory Rush, and I am the Executive Director here at Empower Missouri. And before we jump into our panel conversation, which I'm so excited about, I wanted to just share a few quick legislative updates because we had a very busy week here at Empower. As some of you may know, we track some priority legislation. This session, we're tracking about 30 pieces of legislation right now out of the 1,500 pieces of legislation that have been filed in the Missouri legislature. And this week we had hearings on 5 of those pieces of legislation. So know that many of you follow along with that. So just want to give some quick updates so you all are in the loop. So as it says on your screen, on Tuesday, the Special Committee on Criminal Justice heard House Bill 316. So currently under Missouri law, individuals with a criminal record are not allowed to work in any establishment that sells alcohol or lottery tickets, which eliminates a ton of entry-level employment and really good jobs that individuals could have after spending time in the justice system. So this is a piece of legislation filed by Representative Cherie Tolson Reich out of mid-Missouri. She's filed this legislation. I believe this is the 3rd year running. And last year in the House, it passed almost unanimously. There was only one no vote on the floor of the House. But unfortunately, the session was derailed by COVID last year. So we're really excited. We had a ton of testimony submitted in support for this bill on Tuesday, and we're very hopeful that it will quickly pass through the House and then be able to pass through the Senate as well. On Wednesday, we took up a battle that we have been fighting for many years, and that is to oppose work requirements and tracking for SNAP recipients. This year, it's been filed as SB 138. This bill has a lot of problematic things about it. 2 things that I'll highlight is that it has an incredibly inadequate fiscal note. This bill is going to be incredibly expensive for taxpayers in Missouri if it passes because of federal requirements about the things that we would have to pay for if we were going to require people to track their work hours, and would require an enormous staffing overhaul at DSS because there are just not enough staff members to be able to process all of this additional paperwork that the department would get slammed with. And then in addition, maybe the more impactful area that we really oppose of this bill is that it says that if the head of a household doesn't meet the work requirements, that SNAP benefits will be taken away for the entire household for a period of 3 months, 6 months, or in perpetuity. So it would directly impact tens of thousands of children across the state. And so we were really glad to hear from our child advocate partners across the state in strong opposition. Luckily, this hearing went very well for us, and we are feeling fairly confident that this bill is actually not going to pass out of committee this session, which is excellent news. Also on Wednesday, there was a hearing for Senate Bill 79, which would increase the amount of access to PrEP and PEP, which are really critical pre-exposure and post-exposure prophylaxis drugs to help limit the spread of HIV in the state. This is going to be a harder hill for us to climb as physicians across the state are opposing it because they don't want pharmacists to have the ability to prescribe medications even on a limited basis. So we're going to continue to go to bat on that one, but we're less hopeful about that one coming out of this week. And then finally, on Thursday, we testified in a rural community development hearing on HB 652, which is an incredible win-win for recipients of the WIC program, so expectant mothers and mothers with young children under the age of 5, who would receive vouchers to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables from local farmers markets. So it's also a huge win for farmers across the state. The bill had a ton of support in the committee hearing, so we're really hopeful that it's going to get a lot of traction. And then one thing that I'll quickly highlight coming up is that in about a week, on Monday, February 15th, both Senate and House committees are going to hear SB 65 and HB 755, which are our signature HIV modernization bills that we've been working on for the last 3 years. So please stay tuned next week. Keep an eye on our newsletters and other communications channels. We're going to be sharing a ton of information about those bills. And if that's something you're interested in supporting, we would love to have your help. And with that, I'm going to put our slides off and bring our panelists up. So we are really excited today to kick off this series about how all politics are local, and are so lucky to have this really great panel with us, with individuals from across the state who have been working on this issue for many years. So I am going to very briefly introduce them and then ask them to start out by introducing themselves and telling us what it means to them that all politics are local. So quick introduction. So Phyllis Hardwick ran a really competitive campaign last year for state representative on the Kansas City side of the state. And then most recently has worked as the Associate Director of Voter Protections for Show Me Change, which, if you aren't familiar, was the Democratic Coordinated Committee that sought to elect Nicole Galloway, Alyssa Kennedy, and other Democrats to statewide and federal office. Stephen Weber is the political director of the Missouri AFL-CIO and has previously served 8 years as a state representative and was a former chair of the Missouri Democratic Party. And Justin Stein, who brings great experience from both sides of the state as someone who's originally from St. Louis, but is now called Kansas City home for the last 8 years, and is an organizer with our amazing partners at Missouri Jobs with Justice. So I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves briefly and talk a little bit about what all politics are local means to them. Phyllis, let's start with you.
Sure. And I am very appreciative and humble to be able to go first, knowing that I'm on a panel with folks who have been in this political work far longer than I. So I'm going to keep my first comments brief because I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. What all politics is local means is typically if something is making you mad, frankly, pardon my language, but if something is pissing you off, typically someone else made that decision somewhere and it's impacting you where you currently live, work, or play. And so what I always try to do is I always try to stress the connectivity that we have between our state politics and our local politics, and particularly in our urban cities where we're particularly facing this issue, just because typically Jefferson City is more often than not doing things that are impeding the work that we're trying to do here at the local level, instead of it being actually a kind of a coherent response and working together. It allows people to see what is going on in their community, what is going on in their life, what is going on in their work, and how those decisions are being made away from them. If you understand that connectivity, then you can start impacting it and you can start trying to leverage that system for your own benefit.
I did not mean to mute myself. Stephen, thanks so much, Phyllis. Stephen, over to you.
Well, thanks, and thanks a lot for having me. So when I first started thinking about this, I was sort of like Phyllis. My first thought went to all politics is local means that politics has to be relevant to you to be active or engaged. And the first example I thought of was in my first term in the state house, probably 2009, 2010. I was talking to a group of fourth graders at Grant Elementary School, where I went to elementary school as a kid. And I was trying to explain to them what I did as a state representative. And I was trying to explain that I voted on the state budget and that we funded their schools. And remember, this is when the economy was crashing. And so there was a bunch of cuts. And so I was trying to explain to these kids that, and one of the kids raised his hand and he said, "Is that why we don't have a science specialist anymore?" And I actually checked with the superintendent, and the kid was exactly right. That's exactly why they didn't have a science specialist anymore. And I was impressed that even as a fourth grader, he was listening to what I was trying to explain, probably very clumsily, about a state budget and a huge problem. And he was bringing that down to exactly how does that impact me in my daily life, right? Where is Miss Smith used to be here and she's not here. She was here last year. She's not here this year. Why is that? And I think that that's an incredibly important component of this. The second thing I thought of was sort of that all politics are unique. And anybody who's ever dealt with folks coming in from another state or a national program to work on a local campaign understand what I mean when I say that, right? If you're in St. Louis and somebody says, this happens every cycle, we're going to open an office in St. Louis. Hey, that's great. Where? You're going to do it in St. Louis City, you're going to do it in St. Louis County, you're going to do it north, you can do it south, you can do it west. And they're like, well, we have no idea. And it's because every community, people on the ground understand something different about it. But then, and this is the point that I think I get most excited about, all politics is local means freedom. It's a liberation, a statement of liberation. And that, I mean, you're not tied to national biases and history and things like that. And let me give you two very quick examples of that. And I wish we were all in the same room, because I'd like to ask everybody to raise their hand if they've ever heard of Jared Aldridge. This call, maybe somebody has, but 99% of the time, if you're in a room in Missouri, nobody's heard of Jared Aldridge. And I'd ask, who's heard of Bunston, Missouri? And most of you probably never heard of Bunston, Missouri. Bunston, Missouri is a town of there was 350 people in the last census. It's in Cooper County. And I ran for the state Senate, and I was one of the counties there. So it's an incredibly red area. I knocked the entire town. I got maybe 10 votes. And I was knocked on a door and I was talking to a guy. He was a Vietnam veteran. I'm an Iraq veteran. We talked for a while. After about 10 minutes, he tells me he's the former mayor. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. We talk a little further. He tells me, actually, I was the first openly gay mayor in American history. Now, I'm in Bunston, Missouri, and this guy just told me he was the first openly gay mayor of American history. And I was a little bit surprised. And you can Google it. It is completely accurate. It is 100% true that the first openly gay mayor in the entire United States history is Jared Aldridge from Bunston, Missouri. He was elected in 1980, and he was mayor for 26 years.
Oh my gosh.
That couldn't happen at a national level in 1980, but it could happen locally because people knew Jared, and he was part of the community, and he was able to accomplish something that a national political biases and just the handcuff of partisan politics wouldn't have let happen, right? And so that was an example of freedom. The second one is I Googled this because I was curious about this. In the first decade of the 2000s, the list I found, there were 6 openly trans individuals who were serving an elected office in the entire United States. In that entire decade, there were 6. One of them was an alderwoman in Centralia, Missouri, which is another very conservative town in rural Boone County. And her name is Jessica. She got elected because people knew her. And one of the things that she did was she came to Columbia and she helped us add transgender protections to our non-discrimination ordinance. And so having somebody like that in the room who was an elected official that could say, we need to add this, everybody in Columbia was like, yeah, absolutely, get it done. And because she started at the local level, because there's a freedom to operate there and you're not bound by what you already expect is possible. These are some trailblazers in mid-Missouri that, and I'm sure it's true all over the state and all over the country. So to me, all politics is local means that all things are possible, and that things that can't happen at the national level or that even the state level, we can do locally. And I think that's really exciting.
Good.
Thanks, Stephen. Those are really inspiring stories that I was also unaware of. So thanks for teaching
And
me.
mid-Missouri is an inspiring place, you know?
Justin, what about you?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here and really happy to be here. Phyllis, Stephen, both really good to see you both. And yeah, I mean, ditto to everything Phyllis and Stephen said. I think Something I would share kind of from the perspective of community organizing is that, it's really important that laws get passed, right? And we get certain policies put in place at the federal, state, and local level. But if we don't have community-based power, people in relationships in their neighborhood, in their communities, in their workplaces, in their churches, that are able to leverage that sort of collective power, then to a certain extent, the sort of laws and policies can be, I wouldn't say that they're irrelevant, but they're not necessarily going to be enforced, right? So, I mean, there are laws on the books against wage theft, but we see wage theft as a rampant practice in a lot of industries, particularly in construction, where we have prevailing wage laws that require union wages be paid if a company is receiving government money. But there's plenty of companies that don't actually do that. We see that a lot, especially in the fast food and restaurant industry, where workers are forced to clock out and spend the rest of their shift cleaning up after the store is closed, where they're not getting paid because customers are no longer there, even though they're having to work, right? So those types of things, I think, can only be addressed. Obviously there is the legal apparatus that is able to intervene and correct those situations, but unless workers are organized together on the shop floor, highlighting that, making sure it's not happening, stopping things like that, unless people are in their community saying we're no longer going to tolerate racist police targeting and violence, those are things that are going to continue regardless of sort of laws and policies that we have in place. And so it requires community power, people organizing in relationship at the shop floor level, at the community level, to actually change material conditions. I would also just add, I think we have seen through a lot of different campaigns and issues that we've worked on. I mean, a lot of people on this call, I'm sure, are familiar with, we were able to get the Affordable Care Act passed, early in the Obama administration, but then when it was decided that, the Supreme Court decided that, Medicaid was going to be left up to individual states, it meant that we had to organize in our state and locally, and actually had to, eventually we used the ballot initiative process, but being able to control the apparatus of state and local government is critically important, especially when it comes to the implementation, oftentimes, of federal programs, right? I mean, that's the way Medicaid works. That's the way SNAP works. That's the way WIC works, right? So if we don't have power at the state and local level, stuff that's happening nationally, it isn't necessarily getting into the hands of the people that need it. And then the last sort of, I guess story I would say is that we worked, we've worked for decades now in Missouri. Jobs with Justice has, and many people on this call have, to raise the minimum wage. We did it in 2006. We did it again. We attempted it in 2012. We finally were able to successfully get a minimum wage increase passed through the ballot initiative process in 2018. In 2015, though, we worked on local campaigns in St. Louis and Kansas City to raise the minimum wage in both cities. And we were successful through the local relationships, people exercising community power, workers in the Fight for 15 campaign, really leading the way at the local level, saying we need to raise wages, that the city councils of both St. Louis and Kansas City voted to raise the minimum wage. The minimum wage in Kansas City never went into effect because our opponents in the Restaurant Association gathered signatures and actually blocked it from going into effect. The minimum wage actually went up in St. Louis. Workers got a raise. More money started showing up on their paychecks. And the state legislature, not Stephen, but the state legislature, predominantly the Republican majority state legislature, voted to essentially do what is called preempt St. Louis and Kansas City from raising their minimum wages. And they effectively, they did it retroactively. So the workers in St. Louis who actually saw an increase in their pay to $10 an hour, all of a sudden were knocked back down to $7.35. Money literally was taken out of their pocket. So and in Kansas City, we did pass the raise the minimum wage. Like I said, it was blocked from ever going into effect. And then in 2018, we were able to actually get the minimum wage increase passed. So it's on a gradual path to $12 an hour by 2023. But I share that story because I think that there's also oftentimes a significant interplay between federal, state, and local government. And you know, because we don't frankly control much of the governing apparatus in Missouri, the local minimum wage increases we passed were squashed. And so I think a lot about that story, because I also think that the only way that we were able to garner the momentum to get the minimum wage increases passed in Kansas City and St. Louis is because there were affected workers actively organizing in those cities for a number of years. In the fast food industry, in the retail industry, in the home healthcare industry. And it was only through workers organizing and taking collective power that we were able to build up, you know, create the political space to get those things passed. And I think the challenge before us is how do we also then translate that now to the state, continue to do that at the state level. So when I think about, you know, all politics is local, I think about that campaign specifically in 2015 in St. Louis and Kansas City, where we were able to raise the minimum wage, but you know, the state legislature took it away from us.
Well, yeah, and that was obviously, you know, that was such a heartbreaking chain of events that happened, right? To have this incredible local momentum, local campaigns, and then to have it sort of be squashed by the state. So, you know, I think that what that speaks to is that, you know, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So we have to think a lot about the interplay of local politics and state politics. And so as this series goes on throughout the spring, we're going to be thinking more and more about that. But that's something I want to sort of build on in our conversation today, right? Like, I think a lot of people could sort of reflect on that story, Justin, and say, like, man, what's the point? Like, why bother to do things at the local level if they're going to be, you know, if we're still sort of under the thumb of the state government and they have so much power to change the things that happen locally. So, you know, on the flip side, like, what are some of the stories of like real hope about changes that we've been able to enact locally that then have inspired change at a state level? Anyone have something top of mind there?
I would just add, just because I did kind of end on a downer, so I apologize. I do think I would make the argument that the local campaigns in 2015 really helped lay the groundwork and increase visibility and support for increasing the minimum wage at the state level, so that in 2017 and 2018, when we ran a statewide ballot initiative campaign to put the minimum wage on the ballot, right, it had already been elevated as an issue because of these local campaigns in St. Louis and Kansas City. And I think that that was absolutely critical for the eventual statewide support that we had. 64% of voters, right, voted in 2018 to raise the minimum wage. So it wasn't just I don't think the St. Louis and Kansas City stories, while those are very disappointing and very infuriating, I think absolutely helped catapult the statewide minimum wage increase in 2018.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Justin. I think the parlay there is that the ballot initiative work, honestly, that Jobs with Justice has been very instrumental on, has been an example of taking ideas that are generated at the local level and actually going directly to the people in order to kind of circumvent the state legislature. Now, what's unfortunate is that, you know, to my earlier point, the state legislature has gotten very comfortable going against the will of the people. And so they tried it this last session and actually had a little bit of success with rolling back Clean Missouri. And now they're trying to pass legislation that will make it more difficult for the courts to intervene when they're writing misleading bills and misleading referendum language. Because they knew in order to get Dirty Missouri passed, which unfortunately it did, they were going to have to use very misleading language. And while the courts rolled it back a bit, I would argue it didn't roll it back enough to where people really didn't truly understand that they were voting on something that they had already passed And frankly, it was not about a $5 increase in lobbyist gifts or our $5 reduction in lobbyist gifts. It was about trying to continue this legacy of gerrymandering in Missouri, which will allow one party to have an undue amount of influence at the state level so that they can use preemptive actions to keep Kansas City and St. Louis in their place. And I think that there's going to essentially be a recorrection of that power dynamic. You cannot continuously go against your constituents, whether they have the same R or D behind their names as you do on a consistent basis without some type of rebuke from the people. But that is something that they're trying to continuously figure out, because it has been a release valve, if you will, of very good ideas that are very popular with the people of Missouri, but may be unpopular with one party that's running the state legislature and running the governor's office.
I want to take what Justin said one step further on the minimum wage. Nationally, I think they're trying to pass the $15 an hour minimum wage through reconciliation. And I think it's easy to forget how only a few years ago, $15 an hour was, just a pipe dream. It was not sort of a mainstream opinion. I think everybody supported the minimum wage, but $15 an hour just seemed like unattainable. And it really was the sum of a lot of local $15 an hour movements that made it real, that passed it in places, that demonstrated that the good that it would do, and got America in a mainstream way used to and comfortable with the idea of $15 an hour. And now I think they're going to, I'm not an expert on U.S. Senate rules, but there's certainly a strong commitment to actually, and I'm hopeful that it'll actually become a national policy. And that's an example of a lot of local actions in city across America, very, very hopefully and possibly dramatically changing the entire economy of the entire country.
Absolutely. Well, and so I think we've opened the door to this conversation about ballot initiatives, right? And so, in Missouri, we have the power to put proposed statutes and even constitutional or charter amendments, depending on if we're talking about the state or the local level, on the ballot at both the state and the local level through these citizen-led signature gathering initiatives. Which enables us to bypass the state legislature or the local city council and say, hey, peers, what do you think about this? Why does that matter so much in Missouri right now?
I think it's fixing an injustice. I am still not convinced that Missouri is as red as it seemingly is in the state legislature. And the thing that I cite is that when you actually put policies and not party on the ballot, typically progressive policies are doing extremely well. And so I do think that it's been a creative measure for a lot of organizing groups to be able to leverage and harness to be able to make sure that people first policies are being considered and passed. But I am overwhelmingly worried by some of the initial bills coming out of the state legislature that are seeking to harness and make it more difficult and frankly go after the courts for being able to change language to ensure that the language that's on the ballot is actually fair to the intent behind the referendum push.
Yeah, we're in this moment where seemingly every year in recent history, including this year, legislators are really trying to diminish the ability of citizens to use this tool or eliminate the initiative petitions altogether. So, what's the best way for us to fight back and ensure that we can really maintain this power as citizens in Missouri?
Yeah, so I'd say that first up, it's very difficult. And I'm trying to think of the third big positive thing that has happened in state policy wise in the state of Missouri. Right, the first two are easy: Medicaid expansion and minimum wage increase. And coming up with the third one, I really have to go back a ways. I'm trying to think like what that would be, and it's because like for positive things to happen in the state of Missouri, they do seem to have to go through the ballot initiative process. They have to come directly from the people. They're not going to come from legislators in Jefferson City, which, as Phil's pointed out, is why legislators in Jefferson City are trying to shut this avenue off. One of the things that I always found and important when I was in the legislature, and I worry that we're getting to a point where like the elected officials, it's becoming such a, there's just no sense of shame in anything. It's bizarre, but when you, knowing that you're going to see the same constituents every single year is really important. So I knew that whenever I voted on a bill, the teachers from Boone County, I was going to have to look at them twice a year at least, because they were going to come to my office once and I was going to go to a forum with them once. So minimum twice a year, I was going to have to look at them and explain why I voted on a bill. And that makes a real big difference in terms of deciding how you're going to vote. Because I'd say, you know, when these teachers come, can I tell them why I did this or why I did that? And so when lobbying legislators or working, you know, writing letters and making calls is important, but, and it's tough with COVID, but making sure that there's a way that you're developing a relationship where you're every predictable and they know that you're not going to just write them a letter and they're never going to hear from you again. You're going to write them a letter, you're going to make a call, but they're also going to have to explain to you face to face, Zoom, whatever, why they did what they did. To me, that always made a big difference, and I think that that's, as much as anything, is sort of a path to try to protect the IP process.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just add, I mean, I think a couple things to know. We've had the initiative petition process in Missouri since 1875. Like, it's been an enshrined part of our state constitution. Recently, every time that we have used the ballot initiative process, voters have overwhelmingly voted in support of what we've put on the ballot, whether it be minimum wage or Clean Missouri or defeating, somebody put in the chat, defeating right to work, Medicaid expansion. Those were all, I mean, 2-to-1 voters voted in favor of what we put on the ballot. So I think, you know, we have clear evidence that the way that we've used the ballot initiative process is very popular among Missouri voters. I would also add that the ballot initiative process in Missouri is not, like, it's not easy. It's not easy to use. You know, we typically have to gather about 200 to 300,000 signatures across the entire state. For a statutory change through the ballot initiative process, you need to get at least 5% of registered voters based upon turnout in the last gubernatorial election in 6 out of 8 congressional districts. For a constitutional change, it's 8%. It typically costs several $1 million. Like, it's not an easy process. So you have to have a lot of support, a lot of stakeholders, and you have to have broad support among Missouri voters to actually get anything on the ballot in the first place through the initiative process. So I do think it's like, it's already pretty hard. And I think, so I think those are things that I would really highlight. And I would also add that, like, in the past, in past legislative sessions, when changes to the ballot initiative bills filed to change the ballot initiative process and make it harder have been filed, we've actually had some friends on the other side of the aisle advocating against it. You know, Rex Singfield and sort of his lobbying team. He's a billionaire hedge fund guy over in St. Louis. Typically is you know, opposed, typically on the other side of most issues that we work on, but he has, over the past, you know, decade or so in Missouri, been a fan of the ballot initiative process, and he's deployed his lobbying team to advocate against any changes to the initiative process. And that is not the case this session. He's really kind of stepped back from politics and is, like, not funding a lobbying team. And so the sort of broad coalition that has existed in the past as it relates to this particular issue of defending the ballot initiative process is smaller than it has been in past legislative sessions for the past decade. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat, if that's okay. There's a link to the House Elections Committee is meeting this Wednesday at noon, and there's about a dozen bills that they're looking at that would dramatically change the ballot initiative process and make it harder. Phyllis mentioned some of it, right? There's limiting the ability of judges to intervene. There's increasing the cost, increasing the number of signatures that you would have to get in order to qualify, like all sorts of things that would make it significantly harder to use the ballot initiative process. And there's also been a bill that has moved in the Senate that would change the ballot initiative process. And so I can put that in the chat, but I would encourage everybody to contact committee and let them know that you oppose any change to the ballot initiative process. And I would also encourage you to contact your state senator and let them know the same. And I think just a blanket, any change to the ballot initiative process, we are opposed to. It should stay intact. It's working perfectly fine. There's no need to change it.
There's a question in the chat that says, are the proposed bills to change the ballot initiative process relatively new, or have we seen this in the past? My understanding is that we've seen this in the past, but I don't know about that in as great of detail as some of you might.
No, I think we've seen it in the past. What you're starting to see, you remember that game that you played as a kid in the arcade where, you know, every time a thing popped up, you had to hit it and someone else popped up in another part. Every time we have success with the ballot initiative for passing something and there was some type of intervention, there's usually a law that pops up that tries to address that lever of success. And so what you're starting to see is a little bit more intensity, and you're starting to see kind of more creative ballot languages. Like, this is the first time I can remember in a while that we're going after court intervention. And so they shift a bit, but I think we've seen, you know, significant challenges to the ballot initiative process, at least since 2014, 2015, if I had to kind of put a time where I saw it like really ramp up in its level of just sheer number of bills. But Justin, you or Stephen, you may have additional detail that I don't.
No, I think that's pretty much right.
Were these kind of attacks being in place when you were in the legislature, Stephen?
No, so their attack on voting rights has kind of evolved, and I think they initially started with just basic attack on to try to win partisan races, right? So one of the first things they did, so back in like 2009, was they got rid of single party or straight ticket voting. So it used to be you could go in and you could check one box and you would vote for everybody in that party, and they removed that. And you can tell there's a pretty big drop off as you go down the ballot. And so this was an attempt to make it more difficult for Democrats to win statewide. The second thing they did that same year was they removed party labels. Emblems from ballots. And that seems like a small thing, but that was something that particularly older citizens sometimes used as reference. That morphed into things like photo ID, which we battled for a decade, cranking down on absentee ballot procedures. And so as they've done that, and quite honestly, as Republicans, and I know this is a nonpartisan forum, but in terms of just the observation that I'm making, have consolidated electoral power in the state of Missouri, which they've certainly done over the last decade. They've started looking to say, what are the few things that we don't have control over? What are the gaps? And the ballot initiative process, the IP process, has become one of the glaring holes in their ability to dictate everything in the state of Missouri. And so we've seen this over the last couple of years, but this was something that 10 years ago was not a major priority for them. They were busy attacking voter rights in other ways. And so it's become a bigger priority because of the successes that the progressive movement has had, and things like defeating right to work that way. So it's they recognize it's one of the few things that, whether it's David Humphreys or Rex Singfelder or whoever, can't make one phone call and dictate a policy like they can for every other aspect of government. It's also why we're seeing more attacks on the judiciary, right? We're seeing there's been IPs filed on trying to eliminate the Missouri plan for nonpartisan courts, because that's another one of the areas that a few select people in Missouri don't have a stranglehold over yet.
So going back a little bit, Justin, as you were sort of talking through, really that there's a fairly high bar, right? It's a difficult process to utilize the initiative petition process at the state level, right? It is easier at a local level to be able to do this kind of work. So, I'm wondering, are there conversations happening to get more people involved in this kind of work, and passing local initiatives via the IP process, so that more people can be involved, sort of see how it works on the ground, like educate people how they can make change at the local level, so that then we have a larger like groundswell of folks who understand and are able to operate then at a statewide level. Justin, specifically, we can start with you if you have thoughts there.
Sure. I mean, I think that's always on the table. I mean, we have, we've used the referendum process in the past, in some local stuff. Specifically, we actually worked on a campaign back in 2014 to stop the privatization of the ambulance billing service in Kansas City, and that was like through a local initiative. We were able to block that from happening. So I think that that's always really important. I mean, I think the thing, I think there's always a path forward, and I think there's always a reason to have hope. But I would also offer, like, my cold calculation is that like so much power really does rest at the state level, and our ability to exercise a level of governing power through state government and state bureaucracy. And so, and I say that because, in 2015, when the state preempted us from raising the minimum wage in Kansas City and St. Louis, they also said that we could not put in place any employee benefits at the local level. So paid sick leave, paid parental leave, any other sort of benefit that we might want to try to force employers to have to give their employees at the local level, we have been blocked from doing. And so I do think, there's other issues and things that we could use the initiative process for at the local level. It is easier to do at the local level. The threshold is lower. But I do, like, any chance I get, like, I always want to encourage people to keep our eye on the prize of we've got to be able to move stuff at the state level.
Let me add something to that. So two other points about based off that. One, and to bring it back to a complete nonpartisan framework, there's sometimes that you need ballot initiatives, particularly at the local level, to do things that politicians just don't want to do. It has nothing to do with party, it has nothing to do with ideology. For example, and I'm only using this as an example, I'm not taking a side on somebody or anything like that, but Tony Messenger wrote a column about St. Louis County Council and people getting jobs. And the point that he made that was good was that this is not tied to any one particular administration. It's not tied to one particular party, that executives tend to reward their supporters, former legislators, whatever, with appointments and high-paying jobs that they may or may not have experience in. And this has, again, nothing to do with any sort of ideology or partisanship, but that the way to hold them accountable and prevent them from doing this, because both sides want to do it, is through initiative petitions from the people, right? And that was a really good point, that sometimes you need to have initiative petitions, even not from a left or right perspective, but just from a true we the people perspective. And then the second thing, Justin touched on another point that is, I've been sort of evangelizing on calls, and I want to take an opportunity to do that here. And that is, the progressive movement can't give up on the state of Missouri. And I know, and I've even discussed that there's a very logical reason that people would say, you know what, or look at the situation, we can't compete in Jefferson City. We're going to withdraw into St. Louis, into Kansas City. We're going to do super progressive stuff. We're going to build a wall around communities that we care about, or that we have power in, and that's going to be that. And to that, I would say two things. One is that we shouldn't leave anybody behind. So that screws over a lot of people that you're not protecting. But second, the idea that that there can be any sort of progressive progress in certain areas of the state is going to be a myth, because Jefferson City will reach into any community that is making positive progress, and they will will use the power of the state to stop that progressive change and that progressive progress. And it is completely antithetical to any sort of conservative value of limited government or local control, but we know that doesn't matter. And so if we're going to have, whether it's in Bunston or in St. Louis or in Kansas City or in Centralia, if we're going to have positive change at the local level, there needs to be some level of engagement with Jefferson City and some ability to claw back power, or else we're never going to be safe from, quite honestly, the tyranny of Jefferson City.
We're almost out of time for our panel here. We've got about 6 minutes left before we switch over into our breakout rooms. So, but I want to end with a question about elections. So in the US, we almost always see the biggest turnout for elections when presidential candidates are on the ballot. And in many municipal elections, there are significantly smaller. I know in St. Louis, where I'm based, just in many cases, embarrassingly small turnout for elections for local leaders. I'm interested in hearing from this panel what you think drives this disparity and how we can encourage more of our neighbors to get involved at that local political level and vote in these important municipal elections as well.
Yeah, I think something that we just need to acknowledge is that it's ridiculously hard to vote in Missouri. And I knew this before I took on voter protections work, but after running the Democratic Voter Protections Program for the western half of the state, my stomach continuously dropped with how difficult it is to vote in Missouri. And I think what's ironic about the federal kind of myth around some of their quote unquote voter protections is that some of the more conservative states make it remarkably easy to vote. And I would look at our neighbors to the west that make it pretty easy. You know, you can get a mail-in ballot with no excuses. They have early voting access. You know, you don't necessarily see these attacks on voter ID laws defined as having a valid state government ID as how you need to vote. And frankly, whenever we get the infrastructure to actually make voting easy, I would point to St. Louis County and Kansas City, where actually we had the technology where you could vote at any polling place you wanted. One group decided to actually, you know, market that and actually be an opportunity for folks to be able to vote wherever they wanted. And one group actually hid that fact, and people still don't know that you can vote at any jurisdiction that you want in Kansas City and not have to actually vote at your local polling place. So I can't pull it solely on constituents around voter turnout. And the reason why I think that was so important, because we actually saw our voter turnout numbers be relatively low, even in the presidential, which is how you know that this is becoming a significant issue. But to your more targeted point about local municipal elections, I actually think we need to see more competitive elections. I don't know what's in the malaise here, but we have to get comfortable with having robust, engaging, competitive local elections, from everything from school district seats all the way up to city council and mayor seats. And depending on where you are in the state, you can have it consistently. I have not voted for someone on school board in 12 years because there has not been a competitive election for that seat. The reason why it's not a competitive election for that seat is because you need to have signatures in order to get your name on the ballot. And you have to collect those signatures in December, in the dead of winter, where no one is out and about. And so I do think that we have an infrastructure challenge with actually just creating an environment where we have really robust candidates that can come into the political system at different levels. I'm talking about people of color. I'm talking about people from low-income backgrounds. I'm talking about women. Our state legislature, our city legislatures often don't look like the people that they represent. But we also have to be really, really comfortable with talking about how difficult it is to vote in this state. And even in those pockets of quote unquote local municipal control, there can be challenges to voting there too. And until we start fixing those things, we're going to consistently see voter turnout numbers in the single digits. I agree with you, Mallory, in those off-ballot municipal elections. And you're going to continuously see turnout of about 60 to maybe high 60% in presidential elections in our urban cores. Meanwhile, some of my smaller counties in Southwest Missouri have voter turnout of 90, 95%.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Phyllis, I'm so glad you brought that up because there is such an interesting intersection there and a real back and forth around the initiative petition process and like how we can use that to make it easier for people to vote or how we can use it to fix broken voting systems. So part of what we're going to talk about in the St. Louis breakout system is the passage of Prop D, which happened in November in St. Louis, which significantly improves municipal local elections and gives people so much more say over who we're going to elect onto our Board of Aldermen and into City Hall this year. And that process, Prop D was passed through a citizen-led petition initiative. So, you know, there is these things do really feed into each other. Stephen or Justin, any closing thoughts from either of you before we break out to our city-specific rooms?
Yeah, it was just to tie it back to the very beginning. With local politics, it's got to be relative to people's lives. People have to feel like, you know, whatever their local government is doing is making a change. That going to the ballot is going to change their life in some way, right? That something is going to be different for me in my life if so and so wins versus so and so, and that I have a voice in saying that. And so I think making sure that we have the ability to make those big changes, and there's people that are trying to make those big changes, is critical to driving election turnout at all levels, but particularly local ones.
Yeah, and I would just, I mean, I think to Phyllis's point, I would actually, if folks haven't read it, there's a book that came out a few years ago by a professor from Emory University, Carol Anderson, called One Person, No Vote. And it's actually all about how the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act in 2014 through the Supreme Court decision really has opened up. I mean, it's been the culmination of a strategy over the past 50 to 60 years to make it harder for people to vote, specifically Black and brown folks in this country, but it ultimately affects everybody's ability to vote. And so I think that like that is absolutely, like, I think a really critical piece. And I would also just add, yeah, I think like people don't necessarily like, I mean, I feel like a lot of times with election cycles, it's sort of boom and bust, right? Where it's like 6 weeks before the election, we're just going to saturate everybody with as much messaging as possible. And then, you know, people don't hear from, and then people don't actually, like, there's no organizational infrastructure actually talking to people between elections. So I think, you know, the chat mentioned the grassroots infrastructure that was built by Stacey Abrams in Georgia, right? I think I from a community organizing perspective, I think we need, like, if you're not in an organization, get in an organization. Like, we need to build more organizations that are fighting around issues that are affecting people's daily lives all of the time, every year, all year, not just 6 weeks before an election cycle.
Thank you, Phyllis, Stephen, Justin. Thank you all so much for being here today. This is a really energizing conversation in thinking about things that we can start to do at the local level to affect change. So I am going to turn it back over to, sorry, I don't know if it's Christine or Sarah on our team who is going to tell us how to get into our breakout rooms for to continue this conversation more specifically to St. Louis and Kansas City.
So it was Sarah, but she said her internet just blipped, so I think she is connecting. She did make me a host, so I think I probably could do it, but I have not done it before, so let me see.
If you make me a co-host, I can do it, Christine.
How do you want us to change our names to like have like STL or KC in front of
I think
it?
we can make it so you all can choose which one you want to do. So Mallory, I just made you a co-host.
Yeah, we can do that. But That option is not showing up for me, so give me one sec. Christine, can you try to make me like the full host? Can you just
Yep.
give me the?
No, apparently I can't do that either.
Okay, apologies all our breakout room expert Sarah. We're just having this, of course, wonderful moment of tech woes at the worst possible moment. I saw Sarah like literally just hop off. She had been here the whole time. So let us find out what is going on. Because I don't even have the ability to assign people to breakout rooms right now. Otherwise, I would do that, have you all change your names, but that is not an option that I have at the current moment. So we're communicating
All right,
with.
let me see. I think I can do it.
Oh, great. Thanks for your patience, everyone. We do have a couple of really great speakers who are going to speak in the Kansas City and St. Louis breakout room. So we are gonna get over to them as quickly as possible. If we can't figure this out in the next like 2 or 3 minutes, we'll just have them speak here in the main room, and you'll
Hey.
just.
I'm so sorry. I am on my phone, so it says that I'm in the room, but I can't figure out how to break into breakout rooms on my phone, which I think might be what's preventing Christine from being able to do it.
Yeah, I don't have the option as like the person who's not the primary host. So
Let's see. Make host. That I can fix.
I think I got it.
You got it?
Mm-hmm.
Christine, yay.
Sorry about that. It just really, my Wi-Fi just went down immediately as soon as it was about time.
Okay. Yep, now I see the breakout room option.
Can anybody see that thing where it says you can pick? Or no?
No.
Oh, I hate technology.
The last step will be to open the rooms.
I think the 3 minutes are up.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and so Madison, tell me how to pronounce your last name. I actually don't know that.
Orozco.
Orozco. So we're going to start with Madison because I have her slides. So I can go ahead and get those pulled up. So Madison is one of our incredible partners at Arch City Defenders here in St. Louis. And one of the really incredible things, we'll keep trying to work on the breakout.
I do want to say it looks like the join option popped up for me. I don't know if it popped up for anyone else.
It did for me as well. I'm going to hit it and see what happens.
Yeah.
People seem to be moving.
Didn't pop up for me.
Give it a second. It hasn't popped up.
I have it now. Thank you.
Great.
Victoria, Josephine, and Sarah A. Which room do you want to be in, Kansas City or St. Louis? And I'll pop you in there.
I want to be in Kansas City, please.
Okay,
Josephine, Kansas City.
Kansas City?
Yes.
Okay. Victoria?